Hey everyone, this is SpyPie here, and I'm bringing you an updated build on the Vamplar. The Vamplar was the first build on this channel, and unlike the Warden being PvE and the Nightblade being a PvP build, the Vamplar performs well in both forms of content. The sets that we are using on this build are actually very fundamental to this class, and that's why I feel like these should be gone over first. The first set that we are using is the Burning Spellweave set. The Burning Spellweave set adds 1000 extra Magicka, 123 spell damage, and adds 626 spell crit. When you deal damage with a flame ability, you apply the burning status effect to the enemy and increase your spell damage by 467 for 8 seconds. These effects can occur every 12 seconds. This is a great way to buff your spell damage, and you'll see how a lot of these sets will actually stack together. Now, the other set that we are using is the Destruction Mastery set. This set is a great complement to any staff using character. It adds 1000 max Magicka. It has a 626 spell crit, an extra 123 spell damage, and when we have a Destruction Staff equipped, our max Magicka is increased by 2700. I use both of these sets in tandem to fill out my entire armor pieces. However, you might notice we're not actually using a monster helmet and shoulder. Today we're actually using two different staffs, the Master's Inferno Staff, specifically, and the Vastraw Ice Staff. Now, I'll go over the Inferno Staff first. Whenever we use Destructive Touch, we will increase our spell damage by 600 for 4 seconds, and the cost of the ability is reduced by 10%. The Vastraw Ice Staff, on the other hand, casting Weakness of Elements on a target within 15 meters of you causes a surge of elements to tether between you for 10 seconds. While the tether persists, enemies touching the tether take 1000 flame damage, 1000 shock damage, and 1000 frost damage every 1 second, which is increased by 1% each time it deals damage up to 20%. And this can occur every 10 seconds and scales off our weapon and spell damage. I think it's important to take note of these passives from our gear sets before we actually get into the build. This build is very heavily built off of the gear that it is wearing. So, if you plan to replicate this build, you may find it difficult if you don't have the same kind of gear that this specific Templar is using. However, we are also a vampire, and a very important part of being a vampire is the passives. Strike from the Shadows specifically, whenever we leave Mist form, we increase our spell damage another 300. The way that this build works and operates is by building spell damage in a rapid pace and almost like an engine-like way. It slowly ramps up and continues ramping until it hits its peak. This is a ramp build. The ramp up is very quick and very short and can be done in almost any circumstance, including PvE and PvP. This build is phenomenal in both, and I've tested it out by playing it myself on the live servers every single day. Every single day that I play ESO, I typically log on to the Vamplar to get some things done that I couldn't get done on other builds. The sustain of this build, due to the passives like these, really add to the theme that we're going here, which is buffing up. And that is very important for a Templar to buff up, and for a vampire, it only doubles the amount of power you can have with that. Now, going through our abilities here really quickly, our first one is Puncturing Sweeps, which of course does about 2500 magic damage, and then 1000 damage to all other enemies within the cone. Each strike will reduce the movement speed of the closest enemy by 40% for a second, and will heal for 40% of the damage done with this ability. This scales off of our magic damage. That is also going to be great for this build. Now, for our second ability, we're actually using a Destructive Touch morph, which works with the set that we were talking with, the staff that I was talking about just a moment ago. Now, this will do another 4,000 flame damage and apply the burning status effect. Enemies struck are also knocked back 8 meters and as well as stunned for an extra second. That allows for a good follow-up with jabs. Now, the next ability we're using here is Blood Mist. We will dissolve into a bloody mist, reducing our damage taken by 75% as long as we channel this effect. I, of course, have stacked on to my gear some reduced spell cost enchantments to help mitigate that issue here. Now, while in this form, we will deal an extra 1,000 magic damage every 1 second to enemies around us and heal for the damage caused. Entering this form removes all immobilization and disabling effects, as well as grants us immunity to them as well. So we can't be locked down while in this form. However, we can't be healed and by anyone other than ourselves, and our recovery stats are disabled. That's not an issue because of the damage that this does also comes back as healing in an exact amount. Blazing Spear is another ability that we're using, which will send our spear into the heavens and bring down a shower of divine wrath. This will deal 6,000 magic damage to all enemies within the area, as well as a small amount of damage every second for 10 seconds. Any ally near the spear can activate the Blessed Shard ability, restoring 4,000 Magicka or stamina. That's a great synergy for a party. You really want to be able to keep everyone topped up, especially with like Necrotic Orb going out. This is another way to use, this is another kind of Necrotic Orb type effect on the end, except it doesn't do damage. Vampire's Bane, which is ironic, I know, will blast an enemy with a charge of Radiant Heat, dealing 3,500 flame damage and about 11,500 flame damage over 16 seconds. Upon activation though, we will gain Major Prophecy, increasing our spell critical rating by 2,600. This is a great way to buff up our spell crit. Spell crit on this build is not exactly the most important thing, however, having a little bit of extra crit never hurt anyone, especially with just how much crit is flowing around right now. You can definitely find good crit sets now, and this is a great way to utilize some of that crit damage that you may be stacking on some of your passives later on. Crescent Sweep is our ultimate on this bar. We'll swing an Aedric Spear around with a Holy Vengeance, dealing about 7,000 magic damage to all enemies nearby, and then dealing 3,000 magic damage every 2 seconds for 6 seconds. That's 3 ticks of it on this ultimate. It only costs 75 ultimate, which is not very much, and the enemies that you're running at or facing will actually take an extra 60% more damage. This is fantastic for chasing down people in battlegrounds, as well as just general AoE in dungeons. Now, so we're actually using Destructive Touch again on this bar, however we are using the Frost Clench version of it. To devastate an enemy with an enhanced charge from your staff, dealing 3,000 frost damage and applying the Chilled status effect, as well as taunting. Be careful with that in dungeons specifically, as I'm sure your tank will not want you to be taunting off of them. This also immobilizes the enemy and afflicts them with Major Maim, reducing their damage done by 10% for 5 seconds. We have a heal on this bar as well. Honor the Dead. This is a fantastic heal for DPS to pick up who are Templars. It is a beacon of light, healing yourself or a wounded ally for 8,600 health, and healing anyone who is below 75% health restores 18% of this ability's cost every 2 seconds for 6 seconds as Magicka. Crushing Shock. This is a great way to knock people off balance who are casting. It deals 6,000 damage, split between all 3 elements, and whenever an enemy's hit, they are interrupted and When an enemy is casting, they are interrupted, set off balance, as well as stunned for 3 seconds. Next we have Elemental Drain. This is a weakness to element morph. Sends elements to sap the enemy's defenses. Afflict them with major breach for 23 seconds, reducing the physical and spell resistance by 6,000. This also applies minor Magicka Steel to the enemy for 23 seconds, causing you and your allies to restore 163 Magicka every 1 second while damaging them. Unstable Core is the next ability. This is an Eclipse morph, and it envelops an enemy in a lightless sphere for 6 seconds that harms them with growing intensity anytime they deal direct damage. Their first attack will reduce the movement speed by 30%. This deals 1,200 magic damage. Their second attack will immobilize them for 3 seconds, which deals an extra 2,000 magic damage, and the third attack will stun them and deal 5,000 magic damage. See, the effect of the damage doubles every single time, as well as the crowd control continues to get better. This is a way for you to lock down those melee fighters who come up at you, especially while we're wearing light armor. This is a great way to continue a sustain by just not being hit. Now for the ultimate on this bar, we're actually using Icy Rage to create a cataclysmic storm at the target location that builds after 2 seconds, then lays waste to all enemies in the area, dealing 5,700 frost damage every second for 7 seconds. Enemies hit are immobilized for 3 seconds. There's another way for, in a battleground specifically, to lock down a group section of the map and close it off. Well, now that we're done with some of the abilities, I would like to go ahead and talk about a few extra abilities that I feel like if you wanted to do more of a PvE focus, you could use to a much higher standard than you would if you were looking for an all-around build. Recommendations for a PvE build would be something like Blazing Shield. It's a damage shield for 5,500 health for 6 seconds. This also increases the shield strength by 4% for every enemy nearby. And when the shield expires, it explodes outwardly, dealing 28% of the damage it absorbed to nearby enemies. This is a great way for you to do this is a way for you to do damage while also being protected, and a way for you to essentially off tank if the need was to arise. Another ability you could use with this build would be Purifying Light or Backlash, to summon an expanding beam from pure sunlight to doom an enemy, dealing 3,000 magic damage to them, and then copying all the damage taken from you for 6 seconds, releasing 50% of it as additional magic damage. When the effect ends, a pull of sunlight will remain attached to the enemy, healing you and nearby allies for 1,600 health every 2 seconds for 6 seconds. That would be a great way for a dungeon. That would be a great ability to use in a dungeon, specifically if you're fighting large amounts of trash mobs and may be locked in place for a good amount of time. I could also recommend Solar Barrage, conjuring a solar energy to blast enemies around you, dealing about 1,500 magic damage every 2 seconds for 10 seconds. This ability also grants you Empower, increasing the damage of your light and heavy attacks, which, as we all know, is very, very important to sustain in this game, is to weave those in with each other. As well as Rune Focus would be a great one I would consider picking up if you plan to be more utility focused in PvE, creating a Rune of Celestial Protection that grants Major Resolve for 20 seconds, increasing your physical resistance and spell resistance by 6,000, and standing in the rune heals you every second for about 850 health. Now that we're done with our gear and our abilities, I think it's important to talk about our attribute placement really quickly. Our attributes here are 49 Magicka, 15 health, and 0 stamina. We have taken the Shadow boon, which will increase our critical damage and healing by 15%. We don't always crit on this build, but we do have a very high potential of critting, especially with Vampire's Bane. Our spell damage is 2,520, but if we were to add up all of the effects that we can use together in conjunction, we can grab ourselves an extra 600 from the Inferno Staff. We can grab an extra 400 or 450 or so from doing flame damage, which so happens to be the same ability, as well as, don't forget that Blood Mist will also increase our damage, our weapon and spell damage by 600. So adding it all up, we have about roughly a 1,600 extra spell damage added after we get ramping up. And as long as we continue to pump out these abilities, we can sustain this very, very easily. I would also like to recommend a food with this build. This build runs really well off of Witch Mother's Potent Brew, which will grant us magic recovery, max magicka, and max health for 2 hours. Now, speaking about CP points, we will be going over the green tree slightly, but not as much as the other two, since the green tree does less for damage and sustain than the other, and seems to be more niche and focused on crafting. But we will go through it very quickly. I will go through the abilities I have selected. So we have gold gained increased by 4%. We have an increase of gold found in chests and safe boxes by 10%, as well as we're running with Friends with Low Places, removing bounty from us once per day. We have a 50% chance to gain double resources from resource nodes out in the world. We have a 30% reduction in time to harvest those resource nodes, and we have Escaping a Guard wipes 25% of our bounty and heat. Or Escaping a Guard wipes 25% of our current heat, but not our bounty. Being a vampire, it can happen where you accidentally press a few vampire abilities in a town, and that can really get you in trouble. So it's best to just go ahead and take some things to help mitigate that if you can. Now, going into the blue tree, we have Wrathful Strikes, which will grant us an extra 165 weapon and spell damage to our abilities, increasing our critical damage done and crit healing done by 10%. We also have an extra 320 crit chance, 520 max magicka. We've taken an extra 350 offensive penetration, increase our chance to apply a magical status effect by 30%, as well as an extra 100 spell and weapon damage to our magical attacks. We also have this Mastered Arms here increases our damage done with direct attacks made by 2% per stage for 6% total here. For the red tree, we have a 40% cost reduction on sprint. We have taken a 4% movement speed bonus from hasty, and a 10% extra movement speed bonus here from celerity, as well as an extra 560 max health. We have while afflicted with a status effect, our core combat abilities cost 15% less. We restore an extra 600 magicka whenever we kill an enemy. We reduce the duration of elemental status effects applied to us by 5%. And we also increase our health, magicka, and stamina recovery by 30 per stage We also increase our health, magicka, and stamina recovery by 90 while under the effects of negative effects. We reduce our dodge roll cost by an extra 120 stamina, and we reduce our break free cost by 220 stamina. Now, let's go through our passives very quickly. The passives that I've chosen to take in the Adric Spear line are Piercing Spear, which will increase our critical damage by an extra 10% and increase our damage done to blocking targets by 10%. We also have a Spear Wall, gain minor protection for 6 seconds, reducing damage taken by 5% whenever we activate an Adric Spear ability. When you deal damage with an Adric Spear ability 4 times in rapid succession, as Puncturing Sweeps does, we will also deal an extra 2,000 physical or 4,000 magic damage to your target, whichever is higher. For this one, it'll be magic damage. We also increase our weapon and spell damage by 6%, and our physical and spell resistance by 1,300. In the Dawn's Wrath skill trees, we have increased duration of Sunfire, Eclipse, and Solar Flare by 2 seconds. Casting a Dawn's Wrath ability while in combat will generate an extra 3 ultimate. This can occur every 6 seconds. Casting a Dawn's Wrath ability will also grant us Major Sorcery, or will also grant us Minor Sorcery, increasing our spell damage by 10%. And reduces the health, magicka, and stamina cost. Reduces the health, magicka, stamina, and ultimate cost of our abilities by 5%. In our Destruction Staff skill line, we have taken these passives. Fully charged Inferno Staffs will now deal an extra 12% damage, and fully charged heavy attacks from our Ice Staff will grant us a 4,500 damage shield. And while wielding an Ice Staff, blocking costs magicka instead of stamina. Destruction Staff abilities ignore 10% of the target's spell resistance, increasing our chance to apply status effects for an extra 100%. Equipping an Inferno Staff will increase our damage done with single target abilities by 10%, as well as an Ice Staff will reduce the cost of blocking by 36%, and increase the amount of damage we can block by 20%. Destruction Expert, whenever we kill an enemy, we will restore 3,600 magicka. Whenever you absorb damage using a Destruction Staff ability, you will restore an extra 1,800 magicka. This effect, though, can only occur every 10 seconds. Now, we have taken all of the light armor perks. I will go over these very, very quickly. Grace will allow us to have a 28% reduced effectiveness of snares applied to us, as well as our cost of sprint will be down by 21%. Magicka recovery will go up by 28%, reducing the cost of our magicka abilities as well by 14%. Increasing our spell resistance by 5,000. Increasing our weapon and spell critical rating by 1,500. And increasing our physical and spell penetration by 6,500. Now, in the World Tree under Vampire, we have taken Strike from the Shadows, which we've already talked about, which will grant us an extra 300 weapon damage from our Mist form, reducing our damage taken by 30% based on our missing health, and allowing us to infect another player with vampirism once per day or once per week, reducing the cost of sprint by 50%, and if we continuously sprint for 3 seconds, we will automatically become invisible. Now, you may notice that these require stages specifically within vampirism. Where I think this build does well is at stage 3. However, I can see a point to making it stage 4, as I have before, many times. And I know many of you probably thought I would forget about this one over the last 6 months of builds. However, I have not. Continuous Attack. This is a fantastic passive. Pick it up. 30% increased mount speed, and it's in the assault tree. It really is very easy to unlock, and it's basically free mount speed. Take it. The Breton skills here are Opportunist, which will increase our experience gain with light armor by 15%, no longer important. However, does also increase our alliance points earned by 1%. We will have an extra 2,000 max Magicka, increase our spell resistance by 2,300, and increase our Magicka recovery by 130, and reduce the cost of our Magicka abilities by 7%. This here is to offset a good chunk of the vampire stages. See, here I have a regular cost of my abilities. My regular abilities cost 5% more here at stage 2. This offsets that completely. Just being a Breton offsets it. A great way to become if you choose to become a vampire, a Breton may be a good choice for that if you can pick your race. If you know that that's the character you want to be a vampire, you may want to choose Breton as your race going forward. Alright everyone, and that has been the updated Vamplar build. If you would like to see more from us, more build guides specifically, which we will be continuing to do, as we have since the beginning of this channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, as well as, generally share the video around. Check out our Reddit pages and Twitter pages if you're so inclined to do so, as well as thank you all for watching this video. I hope you all found it informative and informational for building your Vampire Templar. If there's anything you guys liked, leave it down below, and if there's anything you guys disliked, leave it down below as well. This build, as well as all of my builds, will continue to get updated as needed, and I will be continuing to update every build throughout the patch cycle over time. The build guides are really something that hold this channel together in the community that we've built. So if you like to be part of that community and support the channel, that would be fantastic, and we thank you all very, very much just for watching the videos. And that is it. I will see y'all later. Bye.